I'm going to call the meeting of the Middleton Common Council for October 2nd, 2018 to order. And the first item on the agenda is the roll call.
Kuhn?
Here.
Burke?
Present.
Teal? West?
Present.
Olson? Here. Ramsey?
Here.
Sullivan?
Here.
Richard?
Here.
All present?
So the next item is the comments from the citizen present. Anyone who wants to speak? Well, if there's no one to speak, I close that part of the meeting. So now we are on to the updates, and the first one is the update from the police chief Folk concerning the shooting emergency on September 19, 2018.
Thanks, Mayor. I would, before that, I'd just like to invite anybody that can to come to hello? No, it is. Okay. But thanks, Robert. Sure. Anyway, if anybody can come to Common Ground tomorrow, we are having another coffee with a cop, and you folks are all invited to come. I know a lot of you have to work, so you can't come, but, oh, stop it, I can't remember. 9?
9 to 11.
Thank you. Anyway, I was asked to give an update on the active shooter at WTS Paradigm on Wednesday, September 19th. Because this case is still under investigation, I cannot go into the specifics, but I can go over the general response, the trauma healing that our community employees of nearby businesses, the employees of WTS Paradigm, and our public safety members are going through, and future recovery. Calls began coming into the Middleton 911 Dispatch Center and the Dane County 911 Dispatch Center at 10:26:43 on that day, and officers were immediately dispatched. Dispatcher Danny Kimball was the primary Middleton dispatcher that day, and she did a remarkable job in obtaining information from panic-stricken callers, relaying that information to responding officers, and making sure that our officers were safe. Additional dispatchers and office staff assisted her on what you can imagine was a very busy day for our dispatch center. By 10:34:26, nope, I got one before that. The first officer arrived at 10:30 a.m., which was 3 minutes and 17 seconds after being dispatched. At 10:33:03, officers advised that they were entering the building. They advised they had an open door with broken glass. By 10:34:26, 8 Middleton police officers and 4 Dane County deputies had entered the building from 2 different entrances. At 10:34:35, officers advised that they were in contact with the shooter. At 10:35:31, officers advised that shots had been fired and the suspect was down. The first responding Middleton officers were Captain Steve Britt, Captain Troy Hallenbrand, Sergeant Terry Hansen, Detective Sergeant Darren Zimmerman, patrol officers David Kasdorf, Tom Wilson, Richard O'Connor, Tyler Lather, Julie Carbon, and detectives Patty Faust and David Haslow. Not necessarily in that order, but they were the first group that was there, all about the same time. The shooter shot at responding law enforcement officers as they were attempting to negotiate his surrender. 4 law enforcement officers shot at the suspect, striking him and killing him, which ended the threat. They are Middleton police officers Rich O'Connor and Tyler Lather, and Dane County deputies David Lambrecht and Matthew Earle. Entry team law enforcement officers then provided emergency first aid to the shooter, including performing CPR. Paramedics entered the workplace even before it was deemed clear and safe and transported the shooter to the hospital where he died. 5 employees of WTS Paradigm were shot. 3 were seriously wounded, including 1 man who was shot 10 times. And by the way, that man, Eric, was released from the hospital over the weekend and was released from the rehab center today to go home. He's home recovering as we speak. That the shooting victims survived is a testament to their survival instincts, the aid provided to them by their coworkers and responding police officers, the advanced medical intervention they received from paramedics, and the quality of care at the University of Wisconsin Hospital which is our level 1 trauma hospital. The next wave of responding officers, including SWAT team members, searched and cleared other businesses in the building complex at 1850 Deming, the parking lot, and later that evening, the suspect's home. We estimate that 105 people were in the WTS Paradigm business and another 500 in the building complex. Many fled to the Residence Inn. The Residence Inn was gracious enough to open their doors and allow us to use their facility for identifying and interviewing surviving witnesses. 309 witnesses were identified, and initial interviews were conducted at the Residence Inn that morning and afternoon. A command post was established on Deming Way and unified command initiated. Originally, it was a fire truck, an ambulance, and my squad car. We then moved to a mobile command vehicle, which is provided by Dane County Emergency Management. As the response grew, this was determined to be too small, so we moved to the Hilton Garden Inn, who was also generous in turning their facility over to us. The command post was transferred to the Middleton Police Department, EOC, at 8 p.m. that night and remained operational until Friday evening. Special thanks to City Administrator Mike Davis, who was my early conduit for information release during the incident. Mike put city buildings on lockdown and sent out alerts to the media and citizens on what was happening, advised people in nearby buildings to shelter in place, and let them know when things had stabilized. Thank you, Mike. We're estimating that at least 200 law enforcement officers responded from federal, state, county, and municipal agencies. There were 12 ambulances and a full call out from Middleton Fire Department. At one point, after the scene was stabilized, I had to tell dispatch to stop sending officers because we had too many. That's a nice problem to have, to be sure, but again, we were starting to get overwhelmed with all the police officers that were responding. Every resource that I asked for, I received probably 10 times over. Special thanks go out to the Madison Police Department, Dane County Sheriff, our suburban police partners, the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation, and the FBI, all of whom contributed enormous resources in the response and subsequent investigation. Since the active shooting incident was stopped by law enforcement using deadly force, third-party officer-involved shooting resulting in death protocols were activated, which meant that the Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI, became the primary investigative agency. DCI is a specially trained, professional, thorough investigative agency, and their handling of officer-involved shootings resulting in death is well respected nationally and internationally. They've not only been competent, but compassionate to members of our community, employees of WTS Paradigm, and our staff. The involved officers were removed from the scene as soon as practical. They will be on paid administrative leave until cleared by the district attorney and cleared by a trauma psychologist. They were immediately paired with buddy officers. Our peer support network was initiated, and EAP and trauma specialists on retainer were activated. Wisconsin Professional Police Association sent representatives and attorneys to our police department to meet and represent the officers and deputies. DCI has completed officer interview, victim witness interviews, and evidence collection. Once their report is completed, they will present a packet to Dane County District Attorney Ishmael Ozan, who will then make a ruling on the legality of the officer's use of force. Once he has made that determination, reports, documents, and audio and video recordings will be released under the guidelines of the Wisconsin open record laws. The well-being of employees of the Middleton Police Department has always been a priority of mine, and I promise that we will take care of our staff. We have conducted critical incident debriefings with the involved officers, with the entry teams, with our entire department, including dispatchers and civilian staff, and with spouses and significant others. We have encouraged our staff to take advantage of our EAP program for them and their families. The trauma psychologist is available to anyone on our staff, and of course all that information is confidential and privileged. We're doing well, and I thank the many of you who have inquired about that. Even though this went well as far as our response, it's a traumatic event, something that will stay with us forever, will change many, and may force some to leave this profession. The law enforcement community has progressed through the years in handling the aftermath of responding to a critical incident, and we are now much better at taking care of our people. I have vowed to them, their families, and I vow to you that we will take care of them. I've been amazed at the bravery of the employees of WTS Paradigm. They are heroes. They survived and they helped their colleagues survive. Trauma specialists from the state, county, and private specialists have assisted them in providing critical services to their employees. I have talked extensively to their CEO, Nate Herbst. He's a great employer, and he is committed to taking care of his work family. While WTS Paradigm has temporarily set up shop in a nearby Madison office complex, they are remodeling their Middleton site and are committed to returning. They are a great community partner, and the city and the chamber have extended support to the company and their employees. Employees from nearby businesses have been affected, and counseling services have been made available to them. I'm afraid there are many in our community who have been affected by the violent shooting incident, and we need to acknowledge that for many, their sense of security and safety has been compromised. It's important that they recognize this, realize it is normal, and seek assistance. Now is a good time to be a good neighbor and make sure that our loved ones, friends, neighbors, and work colleagues are having their needs met. I'm proud of the response of the public safety community. The table was set long ago for a response of this time. I want to thank our elected officials for budget allocations of additional officers, equipment, and training. I can tell you that there was not one piece of equipment that we lacked on Wednesday in order to respond to that incident and put a stop to it. And it's because you have prioritized public safety as you have crafted our budgets. All right, I could have used a helicopter. Too late to put that in the capital budget? Other than that, I'm serious. We had what we needed.
I would like to say that I'd like to commend.
I'm not done yet, Mayor?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Thank you. I want to thank our training team for recommending specialized equipment and insisting on providing advanced repetitive training on response to an active shooter. I want to thank the officers and deputies who arrived quickly and acted bravely and decisively to stop the threat. I want to thank the many law enforcement agencies who backed us up. I want to thank the paramedics and fire service personnel who responded and saved lives. And I would like to thank our business community, especially the Residence Inn and Hilton Garden Inn, for giving us access to their community rooms and the patients shown by area businesses that were closed during the evidence collection phase of the investigation. And most of all, I would like to thank our community who have praised us on our response, but more importantly to me, they keep asking us how we're doing. So, thank you.
I would like to commend the Middleton Police and all the emergency responders and the businesses as well as WST Paradigm employees. And I'm sure you guys would join with me in doing that. So, do we need to make a motion or
No, I'd like to say something though.
do we need? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And this is more to Chuck, our chief. I attended that first press conference and watched every single one after that. What I was so impressed with was your sensitivity to everyone that was involved in this, including the active shooter. You had cautions of how we should interpret it, and I was extremely proud of how you handled getting the information out, your concern for everyone. In addition to, it's sort of amazing, I think Mark and I both have been in Blacksburg, Virginia, and followed the Virginia Tech shooting, which was nowhere, that turned out much worse. Part of it is we have in a close area, you know, lots of police, a level 1 trauma center and so on, which they didn't have, which complicated it. But just thinking back over that, you did an excellent job, and I am incredibly impressed with this willingness to help everyone, because this is an emotionally devastating event, and everyone needs that kind of support. So I'm glad it's available, and so thank you.
And I agree with Susan. And one thing which is remarkable is that our police responded within 3 minutes. And they had everything, well, and the other responders, and they had everything in control within 8 minutes, which is really remarkable. Anybody else want to say anything?
I just want to add to what Susan said. Chuck showed amazing leadership mean, we all recognize him and his leadership and his vision for the department. But to actually put that in motion and as quickly as he did and the staff surrounding him did that day, that too is a big part of the response, bringing that all together. There's the immediate response, and then there's the aftermath and the managing of that. And I think we can all be proud of our police department and its leadership in the way they handled that.
Let's give them a big hand. Okay, so the next one is update concerning the flood emergency in Middleton. Boy, we are having a lot of these issues in Middleton.
Yeah, I wanted to provide the update, and this update's going to focus on the federal assistance process and some of the activity that's taken place over the last couple of weeks and what we're looking at for the time frame going forward, and also providing an update on the city's contingency allocation and where we're at with the use of funds from that contingency. Oh, it's not on up there? Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, can everyone see the slides now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this first slide is just an excerpt from the FEMA Public Assistance Manual, which is quite a thick document. I just put this in here really to highlight that it is going to be a long process working with FEMA over multiple months, perhaps years. We are right now in the first step of the pre-declaration phase, which is the public damage assessment that the FEMA teams have been on the ground to go through. The next couple steps, and I'll get into the timeline in a bit, but those will be taking place this fall. If there is a federal disaster declaration, then that starts the second phase, the third phase of actually working with them on writing grant applications for specific projects, going through the approval process, getting those funded, and then ultimately getting those reimbursed. So this is going to be a long process, and we're hearing that from FEMA as well, that we're going to need to work through this, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we're trying to do everything we can to position ourselves to make the best case for federal assistance and reimbursement. So to give an update on some of the key dates and what's transpired over the last couple weeks, on September 17th, city staff provided information on our damage assessment and estimating process to Dane County Emergency Management and Wisconsin Emergency Management. That was in the form of a couple very thick binders with all of the information that we've been able to gather, both on public sector damage as well as the information we have on residential and business damages. And just like to have a big thank you to all of the city staff that were involved in that. A lot of people spent a lot of hours in gathering pictures, cost estimates, maps, all of that information. Van Nutt from the Chamber did a great job in assisting us in gathering information on the business damage. A lot of people worked in a very short amount of time to get that information together. On September 24th, we had our first site visit from FEMA. They had a public sector team that came out and met with city staff. They reviewed the information that was in that binder and then did site visits. The following day, we had visits from a team from FEMA looking at residential damage, as well as a representative from the Small Business Administration that would be focusing on the business assessment and potential assistance for the businesses that were impacted by the community. FEMA and the SBA will be working on their reports, hopefully finishing up those reports this week. We were told that October 9th is the date that the state has to make a formal disaster declaration request. And then once that's made, then that's in FEMA's hands and the federal hands. And a declaration would happen on their timeline, but possibly yet this fall. And then from there, we would transition, if there is a declaration, into the process of going through specific applications for specific projects. A little bit more detail on each of those visits. For the public assistance site visit, it was city staff from multiple departments meeting with FEMA, Dane County Emergency Management, and Wisconsin Emergency Management. They spent about 2.5 hours with us in total. They visited sites primarily located at Voss Parkway, Woodside Heights Park, the Donna Drive Detention Pond. We went through a large section of the Pheasant Branch Creek corridor, both on foot as well as driving through the drivable portions of the corridor, as well as the entrance into the Conservancy. When we were having those discussions, some of the feedback we heard from Wisconsin Emergency Management staff is that they were very impressed by the materials that we put together. They said that in some cases they've had entire counties that haven't provided as much information and detail as we had provided, and that would allow FEMA to do a lot of their assessment based on those materials, and it's probably part of why they spent less time with us in the field. The amount of mosquitoes out there also might have had something to do with that. FEMA staff, as we were going through, one of the comments that we heard from them is that FEMA assistance would not generally be available for projects where there isn't evidence of an engineered improvement to the area. So speaking specifically about the creek corridor, part of the questions they were asking us is what work has the city done in the past and what can we show as evidence of work that was done from engineering or as-built drawings or documentation. So there are some portions of the creek corridor where there isn't documentation that we can provide of projects where federal assistance may not be available. And one example that came up is the big scour on Park Street, where they looked at that, where there had been some tow bank stabilization, and just their initial assessment was costs to repair or replace that tow bank stabilization may be funded, but some of the costs related to the erosion on the slope above that and bringing in additional fill up there may not be. So as I understand the process, this team was taking our numbers that we were presenting, the close to $7 million of public sector damage, and looking for an identification of items that may not be eligible for FEMA funding, and they will likely have some reductions to our estimates as part of that process. At the end, they did say that they're in what they would consider relatively minor. I think most of the numbers that we had put together are numbers that they're going to go with. However, that will affect the numbers for the disaster declaration process. My understanding is that doesn't necessarily preclude us from seeking funding on those items. And overall, as part of this disaster area, if there is a presidential disaster declaration, when we get into that second step, that's where we're going to have the opportunity to provide additional information. So we might be pulling up as-built drawings, we can provide the drone footage, the geotag maps, and some of that other documentation, and try to make the best case that we can. It's certainly not a certain process, but the feedback that we're hearing is that, at least for Dane County, for the damages that we and other communities have reported, it looks like there will be enough damage to meet the thresholds. The thresholds are one piece they look at. They also look at more of a subjective evaluation, looking at the community impact statements and the overall impact to the area. Wisconsin Emergency Management is including all of the flooding for the related events over the last month, so including things outside of Dane County as part of this application. That should also help make a stronger case for the public assistance. So from everything we're hearing, it sounds like we have a very good case. We will hopefully know more in the next few weeks. On the residential site visits, there was a team, again, from FEMA meeting with Dane County Emergency Management, Wisconsin Emergency Management, and I went out with them as well. I visited about 20 different residential properties located throughout the city. Their goal was not to try to talk to everyone, but working off the list of people that reported damage, they wanted to get a sampling of different residences in different parts of the city, both to verify the reports that came in from residents, as well as assess the extent of the damage. From what we saw from the people that they were able to talk to, most of the residents in Middleton thankfully did not have what FEMA would consider major damage, which is major structural damage or residences that are completely unlivable. Part of what they were asking about was there damage causing furnaces to have to be replaced or electrical systems being out? And most of the properties that we talked to maybe had water in their basement, perhaps into their first floor, impacting carpeting, drywall. We had one that had a water heater that was impacted, but mostly things that in FEMA's categories are going to be in the affected or minor category, not major damage. They spent about half a day with us, and then they moved on to other areas. I know they wanted to focus very much on the Mazomanie, Black Earth, Cross Plains area, where I think there were more homes that had major damage. And again, for their assessment, they're looking not just at this area, but as part of this larger region. So it's possible that the entire region could qualify for a declaration, even if the residential damage in Middleton may not be in that more major category. If there is a declaration affecting this whole area, again, residents would have the possibility to go through a process where they would talk to FEMA and request reimbursement for specific items. But just to put the expectations out there and make it clear, from what we're hearing, the FEMA assistance is primarily focused on things that are needed to make homes habitable. So if somebody had to replace their furnace, if they had bedrooms that were not livable and they need to make repairs, it's those type of things. A finished basement without a living space and carpet replacement are things that may not be funded by FEMA. On this map, we've showed the map before showing the locations where we had reports of damage. I just tried to circle some of the neighborhoods and the areas that we visited when we were on the ground going door to door trying to talk to residents. And they weren't trying to get to every location, but wanted to try to touch base with people at least in a few different areas of the city. For the business site visits, they did that at the same time as the residential. Again, thank you to Van Nutt for taking the lead on this. He went out with a representative from the Small Business Administration. They did visits on, I believe, about 13 businesses that were impacted. I've listed some of the businesses here. They're trying to focus on ones that reported very significant damage and that where there was somebody that was accessible to meet with them and show them the damage and talk about the repair costs. The Small Business Administration will be making their own determination separate from FEMA, so they're kind of on parallel tracks. It's possible that there could be a federal declaration from the SBA coming sooner than the FEMA declaration, or perhaps if it doesn't qualify for FEMA on the residential assistance, there could be a declaration from the Small Business Association. If the SBA does determine that they'll get involved, their assistance is primarily in the form of low-interest loans to businesses, and those are intended to be gap financing. So not necessarily financing the entire cost of the repair, but if a business has some private financing or funds available and they need additional assistance, that's where the SBA could come in and help fill that gap. And again, this is just a map of the impacted businesses that we had reports on and circling some of the areas that were visited by the SBA representative during his visit. As far as the timeline, FEMA should hopefully be finishing their assessment report this week. Next week, the state would be making their formal declaration. We would anticipate a declaration decision being made sometime this fall. If a declaration is made, then we'll start that second phase of the process where we would be working with Wisconsin Emergency Management and actually writing requests for public assistance. That's where we would provide additional documentation and materials. And then also sometime likely next year, there would be a process for applying for mitigation grants. So in addition to just the assistance focusing on what it would cost to repair damaged facilities or structures, when there's a declaration, FEMA also makes a certain amount of money available for mitigation grants. And there's potentially more flexibility to target funds towards making improvements in the system that would limit the possibility of damage in the future. We've been told that that process usually follows about 6 months after the original declaration. And as we met with FEMA representatives, we told them that in our thought process, for a lot of the work, especially some of the major improvements in the creek corridor and the restoration there, we're looking at going through a planning and design process and engineering work in 2019, with construction on a lot of this potentially taking place in 2020 or perhaps even beyond that if things need to be phased. And FEMA confirmed that that's probably consistent with their timeline, that to work through all of those steps on the first slide, we probably should plan on a large portion of this fall and winter and even into spring for that design application, working with FEMA, potentially being able to start construction on some projects next year, but a lot of this may take a little bit longer to get fully into the projects. Another program I wanted to let you know about, the Madison Regional Economic Partnership, or MADREP, is also making a business microloan program available. This is being funded by an allocation coming from the state WEDC. What we've heard from MADREP is there's about $750,000 that they anticipate being available within this region. And what they're proposing for the program is that there would be loans limited to $15,000. So these are small loans compared to the size of some of the business damage that we have. And it's meant to just provide assistance for short-term projects that need to get started on right away. These would be low-interest loans with a 2-year repayment time frame and deferral of payments for the first 6 months. There'll be more information coming from MADREP, but we just got initial word on that last week, I think, and wanted to mention that as a possibility that may help some of our businesses. At the last update, we provided the full listing of our assessment information, and that's what we had included in the binder with all the supporting information for FEMA. This hasn't really changed, so just providing for your reference the summary again that we had identified almost $7 million of potential public sector damage and costs. Some of those we know may be worst case estimates for items that are either still underwater or we haven't been able to do a full evaluation of yet, but we wanted to make sure that we're documenting as much as we can for FEMA. And then the final item that I have in the update is just an update on our contingency. We had a total of $641,000 that the council had authorized between our general contingency and the emergency contingency funds. We had done an initial allocation on that shortly after that action, identifying some of the projects that we felt needed to get started on right away, with the largest of those being the clearing of trees within the creek corridor. The current estimate column is the most recent information we have on what costs might be in some of these areas. In some cases, those are pretty known costs, like for the tree clearing in the creek corridor. We're very close to having final numbers there. Other items are somewhat still estimates as we get into this, but we've got about $445,000 that's currently estimated within these areas. Within the revised allocation, we've identified an update of where we're anticipating for these projects. One item that was listed as to be determined, the second line from the bottom, is the environmental investigation for the creek corridor, and Finance Committee just acted on a recommendation for that tonight, so we'll add that number in. But based on what we had as we put this together, we had about $180,000 not currently allocated out of that total of $641,000. So we'll continue to update this as we go, but that's, I think, part of the discussion of where we are today, and then for where certain items should be funded from. I know at Finance Committee there was just a beginning of a discussion about the environmental investigation of the creek corridor. One option would be to fund that from the unallocated funds from the contingency here, but as we go forward, I know we'll be looking at stormwater utility, potentially TIF, FEMA reimbursement, and probably other sources as well.
So,
With that, be happy to answer any questions, or I'm sure other staff as well.
well, two things. One is that once the state submits the application for FEMA, is it more like a formality for the approval by the president, or is it, I mean, that it's more or less a done deal, or there could be some hitches? From
What
you
we've
know?
heard is that there are numerical guidelines that they look at for both the public sector damage and the amount of homes that have major damage within the region, but that's not the only thing they look at. There's also a more subjective piece looking at the overall impact and the resources of the region to be able to recover, how extensive the overall damage is. So there is a subjective piece to that. Yeah, from what I'm hearing, I think we've got a very good case, especially on the public sector and the business damage, but I don't think it's just a formality. I think there is a process they go through, and we'll have to wait for the outcome of that.
And the second is the mitigation grants or loans that will be on top of the regular payments from FEMA, right?
Yeah, my understanding is that when they make a declaration, they'll identify a certain dollar amount that's available for public assistance, and then they would also have a portion that would be available for potential mitigation grants. So it is possible that we could be applying both for assistance for the cost to repair certain items that we have, as well as applying for mitigation grants.
Okay. Any other questions okay, Joanna?
So, Bill, I have one question on the declaration, the timing. So if we the state puts in October 9th, do we know other examples of how long that declaration takes from the president to do that? Is it 30 days on typically, or is it faster than that?
Yeah,
Like, do
I
we know
asked
what
that.
happened in Puerto Rico or,
Yeah.
you know, other states that have gone through even bigger events? Is that faster for them, or is it just as plotting because it's a paperwork trail?
Yeah, I've asked people from Dane County and Wisconsin Emergency Management that question. They said after the 9th, there's not a set timeline. It's on the federal timeline, and that can vary. Their best estimate was that we would probably hear something yet this fall, but I don't know if
Fall
that's
is,
30
yeah,
or 60 or
December
whatever.
21st.
I know,
Yeah, okay.
Okay, then
and I
Mark
don't think
Mark
anyone
and then
knows.
Susan.
No, we were trying to make this report as comprehensive as possible, but I think at the last stormwater utility meeting, we had identified a major facility that was not included. Do you remember what it was? Could you make sure Gary, you speak
Yeah.
with Gary, because he was,
Was it the Donna Drive Pond?
could have been, I just don't
Donna
remember.
Drive
That's
Pond is
included.
included.
Okay.
That's in-
And
You just ask
I
Gary.
know,
There's a lot of siltation, sediment deposition in South Pond that was not included. It was the high water hid all of that until that water receded.
Yeah, that
May-
might have been
maybe
South
that was what
Pond,
it was.
because we got all the stuff
So,
from that.
Yeah, and-
because we had engineering, we had considered, dredging that pond, so there were very recent, as of, like, I think a week before the storm, where we had completed, bathymetric surveys of the pond. So, I think, at least from stormwater's perspective, the siltation of that was a direct result of the storm, and we have engineering documentation for that.
Yeah, and my understanding of the process is, we've tried to capture everything we can at a point in time, and they recognize, and we've been clear that these are estimates. Some of the items that we have in there costs may be significantly less once we actually get in and evaluate the condition. There may be other things that weren't included in that documentation. So I don't think that we are precluded from seeking funding for some of these other items just because they weren't in our preliminary assessment binder. I think if there is that declaration and we get into this second set of steps in the process when we're actually submitting requests for public assistance, that's where we have the opportunity to, now that we have done a more thorough investigation, we identify actual costs and we can list those items at that time.
Susan?
Did they give you any indication a negative impact the flooding or the hurricane in North Carolina and South Carolina might have on reimbursement for us?
They did not. I know that FEMA has different regional teams, so our region and putting this together and going through the declaration process, it's different people than would be doing that. As far as when it gets to funding at the federal level, I don't know if that's going to be an impact or not. They did not give us any information
One
on
pot, or
that.
do they spread it out geographically, or proportional to magnitude of damage?
Yeah, I don't know. I think when it gets to the federal process and how the funds are allocated, that does get into more of a political process potentially. But they didn't give us information, and I don't think the people that came out here to visit with us would know the answers to that.
Any other questions for Bill? Well, thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
So the next item is the approval of consent agenda, and I'm going to request that we take items 3 through 7 out and have the approval of item number 1 and 2. So,
Have an explanation for taking those out?
yeah, these are all items which need to go through discussion, so. Some of them are deferrals already there, so.
Well, a point of order, I believe the original rules for this, that a member of the council
Right.
had to request them being removed from the consent agenda.
Okay, well, that's, Larry, is that what you
That-
said?
Well, I think that in this situation, that the mayor is not totally passive in this. Obviously, this is a decision which is simply asked for, not debated, and happens as a routine matter rather than something which is debated by the group. Obviously, all these items still get discussed separately. It simply changes the order, that's all. So I did not see a problem
Okay.
with the mayor doing this.
Then I'll move approval of the consent agenda as amended.
Second,
Okay,
Clarify that's items
one at
yes.
all those in favor of the approval of the consent agenda as amended, say aye. Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. So now we are on to item number 3, authorization to hire firm to provide assessment services for 2019, 2020, 21, 22.
I'll move approval as recommended by finance.
Second,
So I'd like to ask Bill if you want to explain that we had 2 firms that why picked one over the other. You want to?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
most of the members of the council were present for the finance
Yeah.
discussion. Was there any other points that wanted to be raised?
Well, I want the public to be aware, though. I mean, the public isn't, that isn't,
I think it's quite simple. We preferred one respondent over the other. Well, how much more in depth you need to go in that?
And there's a memo on it.
I can hit the highlights on the memo if there's interest, so.
okay, any questions?
Okay.
Okay, all right, so all those in favor of approving the authorization to hire the firm to provide assessment service for 2019 through 22, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Task order, item number 4, task order with Strand Associates for final design services for Pleasant View Bike Park, Trailhead Parking, Path and Access Drive.
I'll move deferral as recommended by finance and PRFC.
second,
Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the deferral of the task order with Strand Associates, say aye.
aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Item number 5, consulting agreement with OnTech Systems Incorporated to provide cybersecurity assessment.
Move deferral as recommended by finance.
Second,
Any questions or comments? All those in favor of deferring the consulting agreement with OnTech Systems, say aye.
aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Item number 6, 2018 budget amendment recommendation from Stormwater Utility Board.
I'll move approval as recommended by the Stormwater Utility Board and Finance.
Second,
Howard, you have a question? Okay, any question or, if there are no question or comments, all those in the favor of approving the 2018 budget amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Item number 7, 2019 budget submittal revision, recommendation from Stormwater Utility Board.
I'll move approval as recommended by the Stormwater Utility Board and Finance.
second,
Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the approving the motion for 2019 budget submittal revision, say aye.
aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. So the next one is the stormwater management, it's under the agreements. So the first one is stormwater management system maintenance agreement with Cascade Development LLC.
Second,
That's great. I'd like to, I'd like to make a couple of very small corrections if
Okay,
possible.
go ahead.
On page 32, not of any real importance, but owner in part 3B is spelled with 2 N's. I don't care, but fix it if you can. Slightly more important is section 5B on page 33. At the end of the sentence, it says NA, which I think was a placeholder, but with all the things under below, I don't want anybody to think that
That's
part
not
3 or 5B is not applicable. It actually is very applicable. So strike NA, and those are the only amendments I would recommend.
Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, all those in favor of approving the agreement with stormwater management system with those two amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Under agreements, item number 2, agreement with Baker, Tilly, Wishaw, Kraus LLP for financial auditing services.
I'll move approval as recommended by finance, subject to final city attorney approval.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Dan, you have any questions? Okay, all those in favor of the motion to approve the agreement with Baker Tilly, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Deeds or vacations, item number 3, vacation of unnamed street.
Move approval.
Now for musical interlude.
Need a second.
Second.
Any questions or comments other than it's already outlined in the, by Mike here?
I guess I would ask for just there's a lot of good engineering drawings in here that I don't, plat drawings, whatever you call them. Could I get maybe somebody to give us like just a 1-minute summary? Or,
I could probably do it in 45 seconds, but if you give me a minute,
Maybe I'll
I'll
hold.
take it.
Take all your
There's an old plat, Assessor's Plat number 1. It created a right-of-way, 30 feet wide, never gave it a name. It's currently paved as part of a parking lot of several apartments. In it, the city really only has a storm sewer. Assessor's Plat number 2, which came along much later, never was recorded. It would have converted that to an easement, but since it wasn't recorded, that didn't happen. So there's all sorts of lot lines out there that people are conveying property with, assuming that Assessor's Plat number 2 had been recorded, but it wasn't. And so this is just a small way to take care of our little piece of that issue, where we would just be catching up to what property owners think happened with respect to vacating a right-of-way and replacing it with a storm sewer easement. But it does trip over several different ownership lines. So we would want all of it to go together so we don't get a remnant of island right-of-way out in the middle of a parking lot someplace. So this just is starting the process. Is the council interested, is really the question here. That was way longer than a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, does that
I
sound
cede
okay,
my
Robert?
time.
Okay. Yes, Emily.
Are you interested in renaming it the Robert Burke Parkway Island?
I'm not interested in that, but thank you.
It's unnamed, so, okay.
Yeah.
It is interesting to know, as Sean said, that assessor's plat came out along much later. It was the 1970s.
Wow.
The original one was in 1941, I
Yeah.
think, so,
Very old.
before we were a city.
Long time ago. Okay, all those in favor of vacation of the unnamed street, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. We are on to miscellaneous. Authorization to hire professional environmental services in the Pheasant Branch Creek corridor for environmental phase 1 and phase 2 investigation. So I guess we need to modify this, that's not phase 1, phase 2.
I'll move
right?
approval as recommended by finance to hire True North for an amount not to exceed $73,5250 for an MMP.
Second.
Okay, so you have it. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. We are on to the resolutions. Resolution 2018-38, requesting Dane County Park and Ride grant for South Fork Trail, Pleasant View Road to Erdman Park.
Move approval as recommended by PRFC and finance.
Second.
Any,
I just have one comment. this resolution refers to an attached park and ride grant application, which is not attached. So if everybody trusts that the application is fine, and since it's coming from us, we can ignore that, but it isn't actually included in the resolution at the moment.
Okay. Is that, but you're going to include it when you, everything will be complete, so. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion to request Dane County Park and Ride grant, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So motion passes unanimously. Item number 2, 2018-48, endorsing case for damage to businesses due to surface water outside the control of the 100-year floodplain system.
Move
Council, please.
approval of this resolution.
Second.
Yeah, good. The founder of
Standard imaging.
Standard Imaging, I think, provided a very convincing documentation that his flood damage was not from the confluence pond overflowing, but water flowing from the north across the airport road down Nursery Drive. And this helps him significantly in getting insurance claims.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Oh, Robert.
Just to check with maybe the city attorney, is there any risk that in our attempt to help our businesses in Middleton, this resolution would cause any liability to the city itself?
This is the second draft of the resolution, and any prior concerns we might have had were resolved by this form of the resolution. I see no problem with it.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it would not create any problem with FEMA or any of those things?
No, you know, the bottom line is we got a 1,000-year, 1,500-year foot storm. We don't design stormwater improvements, nor does anyone else, for such storms. And it's a classic act of God, and I think this resolution makes that clear.
Does that benefit the city in taking that claim? Is that somehow, is that possible that supports damage claims from the city for infrastructure? Does that improve our
That isn't the
position?
reason the resolution was.
Well, I understand that,
Yeah.
but you know, if it's not from flooding of a body of water, is there a potential that any of the public
How
improvements?
does this differ from a hurricane?
Yeah, I can try to address that. I don't think this is going to have much of an impact for the city, and part of the reason there is our property insurance does include flooding coverage. The issue is it's limited to certain types of facilities, primarily buildings, which were not significantly impacted.
You're okay, right?
I am.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. Committee appointments. Appointment of Lori Alice McLeod on Board of Review.
Move approval. Second.
Any questions
I
or
have a
comments?
question.
Yes,
Wayne Federer resign?
yes, I talked to him, yes.
Did he resign, or did you ask him to resign? Did he resign of his own will?
No, I asked him because I wanted to, number one, he was very reluctant to go on that board, so I had requested him, he got on that board. Now he's in Plan Commission, and he's also on Middleton Westport Commission, and then this was the third thing which he was on, so.
That's not the point.
No. I have a concern with committee members being asked to resign from the committee once they've been appointed and approved by council.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor of the motion to approve the appointment of Laurie Alice McLeod on the Board of Review, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so it passes 7-1. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.